Shall I answer Paul's question?
Yeah, please. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the AGI Early Careers Network webinar. My name is Holly Smith, and I'm a committee member of the AGI's Early Career Network. Before I introduce you to the speaker, I'll just give you an overview of the AGI and the Early Careers Network for those of you who don't know. The Early Careers Network is part of the AGI, and we aim to build a community of early career industry. The committee is made up of volunteers of early careers professionals with less than 10 years experience, me being one of them. The aims of the Early Careers Network are to build a community of early career professionals by hosting events and providing networking opportunities across the UK, raising early careers professionals' profiles within the industry through showcasing at AGI events, and then targeted training such as this webinar and the industry or academic events as well. You can follow us on Twitter at AGI_ECN. So please follow us there. And you can also email us on ecn@agi.org.uk to get involved on the committee if you would like to be more involved. Joining the Early Careers Network is open to all AGI members. You just got to log on to your account and select Early Careers Network on your interests, and then you'll be on the mailing list. And if you're not already part of the AGI, then you definitely should be. It's really great. Students are free. You can also get corporate membership through your company. You just need to work out whether your company is part of the AGI corporate membership, or a individual membership is £72 a year. But it's well worth it. You get discounted events and loads of intel on the industry and things like that. So let's get on the webinar. The speaker today is Matt. Currently, Matt ConsultingWhere's Middle East and Africa office from Dubai. He also volunteers with the International Humanitarian Mapping. Also represents the geospatial industry through his role as director of the Association for Geographic Information. Discussing his role as a volunteer for MapAction and his career in the geospatial industry. If you have any questions for Matt regarding any aspect of his work, please write them in the live chat box or tweet them at AGI_ECN, and then we'll try and get through as many as possible at the end. So over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you all. Hopefully you can all see my slide deck. I'm going to spend the majority of time talking around MapAction, give you a bit of an introduction into them as an organisation and what it's like to volunteer with them, and then just give you a quick talk through what it's like to be an international consultant in the sort of geospatial GIS industry. So Holly's just covered off a couple of practicalities there about how you can submit your questions in the chat on Twitter or by email, and any we don't cover today I'll be more than happy to follow up with afterwards. So a little bit about me. Holly kindly introduced me there. Just to give you a bit of background, I did a degree many years ago in GIS at Portsmouth. I've then worked in local government, in the private sector, both as staff and as a consultant. I volunteer for MapAction, obviously, and I'm now, for the last 18 months, been based in Dubai, running a consultancy company out here. So let me take you through some things. So what is MapAction and who are they? Something you may or may not have come across as a charity. They're a UK-based charity, and effectively they work in mapping. So as I'm talking to people that are already involved and aware of things like the AGI, the simple way of describing MapAction is they deliver GIS services in humanitarian disasters. That could be things like earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, but also what we'd call complex emergencies, which is more IDPs, people displaced by war, food crisis, etc., droughts and so forth. The main aim of MapAction is to basically use geospatial information and information management in general to help target and coordinate the delivery of aid. Basically, the kind of concept is if you have a finite resource such as aid, where does it need to go to, in what order? So all the big geospatial problem, as some of you may know from your universities or jobs, place plays a large amount of factors in these decisions. So having GIS there in the decision-making circles is very important. MapAction has been around since 2002, and so far it's gone to 65 emergencies and a lot more activities, which I'll come on to describe. I won't read through effectively our mission statement, but it really just underpins what I was saying, that information and decision making is key, especially in a time of crisis. The aim of better decisions is effectively it saves lives. In our work prior to emergencies, obviously it's around making people more resilient and prepared to be able to deal with disasters. Now that's more around, again, the practical of having things like databases ready, information on population ready, so when a disaster happens, you don't have to search around for the information, it's ready and ready to use. So, why MapAction? After a disaster, I think the simple question is, where do you start? Hopefully no one has ever been involved in any of these kind of incidents, but if you take a moment to imagine what it's like to be in an earthquake or the Boxing Day tsunami, effectively everything changes in an instant. We'll come on to the complex emergencies that I spoke about earlier in a little while, but if we take sudden onset emergencies, so that's normally natural disasters caused by either weather, extreme weather, things like earthquakes, tornadoes, etc. It changes a lot of things. If we think about just moving around, if you were going to deliver some aid, your whole road network might have changed. So you previously could have had a fully mapped road network with sat-navs and everything in all your delivery vehicles. Well, suddenly the road network's changed. So all that kind of preparation can become redundant. Unfortunately, the practicalities of things like earthquakes, this is actually a picture here from Haiti. Inside that building, not only unfortunately were some of the country's top GIS staff who unfortunately perished, but also all their servers that had all the data and all the mapping on. So they did have all the information, but it was then suddenly inaccessible. And that's where people like the UN system and also MapAction step in, is to help out and support the process in the early stages. If we go on to think about other things that aren't sudden onset, but things like Ebola, it's a very spatial problem. Ebola was really around transmission of disease between people moving around. So the second people think of it as a spatial problem, obviously you need GIS and GIS expertise in there to try and help solve that. So what does MapAction do at the broadest level? So there's the disaster response side of it. I'll go through what a response looks like in a little bit, but disaster response can be basically sitting, most of us are volunteers and we're sitting in our day jobs, we get a text message and suddenly that's it. Our plans change for the next 2 weeks because within 12 hours we could be on a plane to an unknown destination somewhere in the world that's unfortunately become the site of some sort of disaster. But also it's one of those odd scenarios where we don't want disasters. They're an unfortunate reality of the world. We'd all prefer not to have disasters, but as we acknowledge the fact they do happen, the other main thing that MapAction does is preparedness and training. So that's making as much as possible of the time before a disaster, either train people in country on what GIS is. It could be to do with training people on how to use desktop software, or it could be training the decision makers higher up in government to say, look, you can make a better decision with some mapped information than you can without it. So as much as we can do is around preparedness and training, but our sort of rapid response function is more around the disaster response. So where have we worked in the world? Couldn't have a presentation on MapAction without a map in there. So you can see the spread of, I'm just waiting for the slides to catch up. You can see the spread of disasters that we responded to there. You'll notice obviously probably not too much in North America and countries that effectively have very established disaster management processes in place. Used to say previously not in Europe, but as you'll see, there's a few dots there down in Southern Europe that effectively coordinates the responses we did in line with the migrant crisis, which we've all seen about over the last couple of years in the news. I think what I would say here is if we were to go through this list and look at the different countries, it varies how much you will have seen in the news and whether MapAction has responded. And what I mean by that is a funny equation, which I'll just explain. So if there's a big earthquake and 10,000 people die, that makes the news. If there was a big earthquake and one person died, it often doesn't make the news. The problem, or the practical problem that it is 10,000 dead people, unfortunately, are beyond help. The big earthquake that only killed one person probably made 9,999 homeless, hungry, without shelter, etc., etc. And that has a big impact because if you don't see emergencies in the news, you don't get the public support, etc., and the funding and the awareness doesn't come. So it's an interesting conundrum that actually the big and worst disasters that make the news are often, unfortunately, to do with the death toll. Now, the death toll, unfortunately, doesn't relate to actually the need on the ground, where it's the people in need are more ones that have been disrupted or have their lives changed by the disaster but have survived it. Now, an interesting slide, I'm not going to talk through each country here, but the general split on screen that you can see here is orange, or the yellowy orange color there, are sudden onset. So they're your sort of classic earthquakes, tornadoes, volcanoes, and natural disasters or things that are sudden onset. That used to be probably more like 75% of the work that MapAction did was sudden onset. But if you look now for both the blue and the grey areas combined, are almost coming up to a 50-50 split. So the grey area is what we call a complex emergency. That effectively is to do with man-made problems. So whether it be war, displacement from crisis, displacement. We've had ones where a munitions dump has gone up to people who had to leave their homes, etc. So they're things that require, they're not about to come and go in a short period of time. They're things that we'll see in the news and so forth for many years, but it's about an ongoing impact. Slow onset, the blue area there, is often to do with food and food crisis and nutrition. So we know, for example, now, and again, this probably isn't in the big headlines in the news, it's there if you look for it, there is a food crisis. I wouldn't even say it's on the horizon anymore. It is happening now in Africa. There are massive food shortages across droughts, etc., worse crops for 10, 20 years. So there's things like that that are, we know are coming, but it's a case of how do you get involved and where do you help at the right time. So how do we actually work as an organization? I'm going to take you through a typical disaster response scenario, which is looking at that orangey yellow side of things. So these are sudden onset, so something that no one could have predicted or prepared for. So if we take the example of an earthquake, you have something, you have a trigger, an event happens. So there's lots of organizations in the world that monitor these things, and MapAction is always informed the second these type of things happen. And effectively, all the volunteers in MapAction get a text message that it says, hey guys, watch out, there's been an earthquake in Sri Lanka, for example. Stand by, we don't know what we're going to do yet, but please start checking your availability. So it sort of means, can I take the next 2 weeks off work? Is it my kid's birthday? Have I got a big project deadline? Yes or no? So you begin thinking, you're kind of put on standby. You then get a second message which says, right, we are going. Please now log your availability. So the kind of rough numbers are, if there's over 70 of us that are volunteers, and we normally deploy in teams of 3 people. So if all 70 people reply saying yes, no, maybe, still checking, the idea being there should be 3 that are available to go to the disaster. At the same time as it's working out who's going to go, we start a very important process, which is what we call the data scramble. And that's effectively going off and looking in both the news, on the internet, and in databases for as much information as possible. Now we get some of this ready already. So we have like the base mapping for countries up to date as possible, aerial imagery. So if you think about a disaster such as flooding or an earthquake, it's about looking at the weather forecast for the next few days. What's the latest population data that we had of the affected area? what's in the news, because effectively what we have to assume is the second we get on a plane, we won't have internet connectivity again. Well, that's changing. More and more technology in parts of the world are allowing us to have internet connectivity, but we deploy expecting not to have internet connectivity. So we have to take everything on a hard drive that we think we're going to need for the mission. So the head office obviously decide who and what is going to happen. They select the people that are going to deploy. When it's been me, it means finishing up work, sticking the out of office on very quickly, briefing colleagues very quickly on what I was up to and what the next 2 weeks were involving, then going home and packing a bag. Now we all are trained to have a grab bag ready with the essentials in it, so you just top that up and effectively head to the airport. What you'll be met at the airport with is our kit. So we travel with everything from 2 or 3 laptops, obviously, to allow 1 or 2 to break. We carry emergency communications like sat phones, GPS, mobile phones ready to put a SIM card in from the country we're going to. We take an A3 printer normally as well, so we take some big flight crates that have A3 printers in, paper, ink. In the really bad examples, we obviously take tent, food, water purification devices, but again, that's kind of all decided upon the level of disaster and what we know about the country. So then 2 or 3 of us will be put on a plane and off we go to the set country, and it's normally an interesting process because after disaster most people are trying to get out of a country. We are some of the people trying to get in. So I don't think I've ever taken a direct flight to a disaster because obviously things like airports and so forth shut down. Sometimes we go on normal planes alongside normal passengers, and sometimes we go on government planes, not quite military, but things like government planes that have been chartered to take us, search and rescue teams, etc., all there. Normally you get nearby. So for example, in Nepal, the plane got as far as Delhi, then it had to wait until it was allowed to then fly into Kathmandu because Kathmandu airport was damaged by the earthquake. So that's sort of getting to the field. Once we're in the field, it's all about creating some information products that help paint a picture of the scene on the ground. And we'll come on to look at a few of those in a minute. Obviously, we work in quite pressured environments. It's often sort of 20-hour working days because everyone wants to do their best, but obviously to do your best, you need to be fit and healthy. So it's important to look after yourself in the field. And obviously, it's not just us in the field. We'll be working alongside UN agencies, the government of the country that's affected, other charities that have turned up, and obviously the people that have been affected. And when we talk about the people being affected, that's effectively who we work for. Yes, we might be volunteers from MapAction. We might be requested in country by government or by the United Nations, but the people we're really working for are the people that have been affected by the disaster. So that's a real snapshot of the kind of typical deployment. Obviously, things like the slow onset and complex emergencies, there wouldn't be so much of the flashbang there in the middle. It might be things that we have a bit more time to prepare for. It might be that we select people that can speak a certain language to go to certain areas and so forth. But that's a typical deployment model. So once we get to the field, and everyone says, what does the field look like? Well, it never looks like the same thing twice. And there's 6 pictures up there, which give a bit of a flavour. If we look at the top left there, that's a tent which was put up inside a building because the roof had collapsed, and that was because of a typhoon. That's Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. There's ones where you're squeezing in other people's offices in the middle there. In Haiti, there was zero buildings left effectively, so that was operating in a very dusty airport environment in the back of a tent. You then often move into office buildings when they've been deemed safe. Some people in Namibia there were set up around the swimming pool. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, the buildings in these kind of emergencies aren't affected, and they're in Islamabad, everyone's sitting in a nice air-conditioned office. I have to say that's not the common result. It's often very warm and a bit sweaty. So when we're actually in the field, the important element is collecting data. So the reason we don't do this sitting at desks at home is that because you need to be on the ground to be able to collect some of this information. Yes, you can pick up some information from the news, you can pick up some information, say, from satellite imagery, but when you're talking about these kind of emergencies, it's about having an accurate picture of what's going on the ground. Now, these are just for sort of examples, just to talk you through of what we might be doing in the field. If you're lucky, you might be the one that's allowed to go up in the helicopter, but normally we just end up providing information, as you can see there, for somebody that's in the helicopter to be able to capture what they see in an accurate fashion. That means we can then plot it onto a map. You do get scenarios where I saw a bridge has collapsed. That's really useful information. Where did you see it? Oh, well, it was down that road. That's obviously not able to be put onto a map, so we can't let other people know that bridge has collapsed. So we train and advocate for people using things like GPS, and even just taking photos on a smartphone these days captures a coordinate, and we can then work out where a problem was. In the bottom left there, there's what we would call a coordination meeting. So that's all the representatives of different organizations coming together and deciding, sharing what they've been up to. It might be saying, hey, right, I've been out today, I've noticed 10,000 people that all need shelter. Another person might be saying, hi, I've just arrived, I've got 10,000 shelters. So the idea being you're trying to join those conversations up. We're just there to listen to who's doing what where, because what we try and do is making sensible decisions on what we don't want is overlap. So if you've got two people with shelters, you don't want to necessarily go to the same area because there might be another group of people that need help somewhere else. So we try and take the information out of these coordination meetings, which are often very busy, as you can see from the number of people there, lots of people passing in information. We try and collect all of that and put it together to form what we would call an operational picture that then allows decision making to be made on who should go and do what where. And the last picture there is sometimes go and find a tall building and take a photo. And what we did with this bottom right area, this is Nepal. This is an IDP camp that sprung up. People that didn't want to sleep in their buildings because of the aftershocks after the earthquake. And we take that information and we try and make a map from it to help plan the camp. Now, obviously, it's not going to be as accurate as going down and surveying each tent, etc. But what you do get to do is come up with a better picture than a blank piece of paper. What we would say just briefly there is obviously there is an increase of things like drones in the field now, which does allow sort of image capture and so forth. Still pretty new. One of the main problems being if you turn up to a country with a drone, you've got no idea what their laws and licenses are about using drones, etc. So you will probably see more and more of those in the field, but we'll wait and watch for that kind of stuff. Something that's important to mention around data collection, and this is something that happens both with people in the field, but also people sort of crowdsourcing information. A lot of places in the world don't have very good mapping. In the UK, because of people like Ordnance Survey, have done a great job for a great number of years on mapping information really accurately. What this slide shows you here, this is Port-au-Prince, and in 3 days between the people on the ground and also more importantly people like crowdsourcing from just taking a little square and updating their square, you can see in 3 days it went from pretty much just having the main roads and some of the side roads to having a lot more detail, main roads, side roads, buildings, but also things like where are schools and all that kind of stuff. So the map data became much more enriched. And obviously what that allows us to do is use that in maps and paint a much more accurate picture. And we'll touch upon later if anyone's ever wanted to be involved in that kind of stuff, where you just take a square kilometre of a part of the world and map it so that if anything was to happen, there's a map there for it. We'll come on and share some information on that later on. So what all of the things that we do in the field come together to form is something we would call the common operational picture. So what we're trying to do is bring together all the information we can so that when someone walks in and says, right, where should I go and do X or Y, we've got the information together with everyone else's information to be able to say, well, look, okay, if you're talking about flying in medical supplies, then this area hasn't had any yet. These guys in the West had it yesterday, these guys in the East haven't had it. Or if you do have 10,000 tents to distribute, well, we've looked that there's more people affected in the South than there are in the North, so we suggest you head to the South. You're never going to be able to give anyone the perfect answer in the field because things change at such a rapid speed. But we are aiming to have a common operational picture that means if people walk into wherever we're set up and say, oh, can you have a map of this? Can we have a map of that? We're obviously handing them out saying yes. Now, interesting enough, one of the most common maps that people ask for is, and that's not as silly as it sounds, because half the places I've deployed to with MapAction, I'd never been there before I had deployed to MapAction. So the city of Tacloban in the South Philippines, people were arriving there. They might be charities from different countries. They might be UN staff coming from New York or Geneva or other countries. They could be other people from the Philippines that have been sent to that part of the Philippines that they've never been to before. So one of our common maps, it's normally the first map we make and the last map that we hand out, is where are you? Where's the coordination center? Where's the airport? That's probably your evacuation point if you needed it. Where's the IDP camps? You know, where are things like helicopter landing pads and so forth? So it's really one a basic map. Where am I in the world? How do I get my way from here to either an airport or to a coordination center, which is likely to be where these people are working? The other types of maps, we're just going to have a run through now and just show you some example maps. So how do we do it? The model that MapAction follows is about 10 or so employed staff and about 80 or so volunteers. So it's a very lightweight organization when it comes to staffing, and it's definitely a volunteer-based model when it comes to deployments. The type of people that volunteer for MapAction are all generally in the field of information management or GIS. There are a few specialities around the edge, some more humanitarian focused, some more technical focused, but 80–90% of the people have backgrounds in information management and GIS. Now, that could be someone like someone working for the Environment Agency who's an expert in flooding. It might be more general GIS practitioners like myself, or it could be someone that's worked in government and knows how to interact with ministers and so forth. So the team itself get together and train about once a month, and then once a year they do a big simulation exercise, or SIMEX. And obviously part of the enjoyment of MapAction from my point of view is that it is like one big family, because you will go and deploy with some of these people for 2 weeks in a field, like I said, probably in hot, sweaty tents, working 20 hours a day. So you get to know these people pretty well. And it's great to obviously know them in advance before you deploy to the field as well, which is why we get together and train. This is a picture from 2 or 3 weeks ago at this year's big training exercise in the Lake District. So I would not be allowed to do a presentation on MapAction if it didn't include some maps. So what I'm going to do now is just run through some maps that have come from different disasters. Not only are they sort of maps for decision making, but when you were involved in the disaster, I'd say each map sort of tells its own story, because you might have been there when it was made. You might have been in the UK helping someone in the field when it was made, or you might have seen it on the website or popping up in things like the news, etc. So I'll just wait for the slide to catch up there, but this first one is going to be a map of the Philippines. And this just shows very basic information, looking at where the typhoon was predicted to go, and then where it actually went. And then underneath it, in the light and dark brown colouring, is effectively just the population of the different municipalities of the Philippines. Now, what that's trying to obviously insinuate there is, if it's a more densely populated municipality, then there's going to be more affected people in those regions. So again, you can't say these things for sure, but what you can do is try and build that common operational picture to say, look, we know where the typhoon went and we know how many people live there. So we can make some best guesstimates that these areas are where you want to head with your resources first. Obviously, by the end of the response, you want to have covered everywhere, but it's often a case of what can we do first. The next map is a good map of where you actually just can't put everything into a GIS and press go. There's often an element of analysis that needs to be done in the field. And what this map shows here, the 3 maps, are flood extents. Now, you could present either the 2 maps on the left there that have got the blue colouring. You could present that to someone and say, this is where the water is. That's it's a nice picture. It shows you what's underwater, what's not, but doesn't really mean much to someone on the ground to say, you know, where can I access and where can I not. What the third map on the right-hand side there in green and red shows is the change between those 2 days. And obviously what we're looking at here is increasing or decreasing in flooded areas. And then you can work out if areas you couldn't access yesterday, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? So again, in the field, it's about helping that decision. So being able to bring people together to say, look, this is a more important area to focus your resources on. Now, the next few slides have got some thumbnails in them. And what they really represent is the kind of the groupings of the type of maps that we create. Now, these first 9 here are what we would call core maps. So very much just, as I said, where are we? Where's the affected population? You know, what's the topography like? What are the names? You know, again, we were in countries where we can't necessarily speak the language. There might be local languages, there might be national languages, there might be English versions of languages, etc. It might be a case of where are the roads, where's the transport, where's the infrastructure, and where is the things like airports. When we look at the population and affected population, is obviously, is this a best guess, or is this because someone's been out and checked? And all that information will be captured in the description of the map, which you can see each map here has a legend and also detailed information on the left, and not that you'll be able to read it on these. And others are what we would call situation overview maps, like the one in the middle at the bottom there. You know, things like desktop GIS can't draw big arrows very easily, suggesting that lots of people are moving in this direction. So what that obviously aims to do is, at a high level, the map, the annotation on top of the map, whether that be the text boxes or the arrows, how can I quickly tell a story with this map to say a senior government person that we're briefing on the response to an earthquake or the response to the migrant crisis? How do we portray all the information that we've got in a quicker possible fashion to leave them with a better picture? So this next selection of maps, which the slides are just catching up, I would group as sort of vulnerability and access maps. So if you're trying to plan your response, how do you get into different areas? On the humanitarian scale, it's broken down into what we call clusters. So that's effectively focus areas. So some will be looking at things like education, some will be looking at transport, some will be looking at health, WASH, which is water, sanitation, and hygiene. So you have these maps are aligned to those different parts of the humanitarian response system, the clusters. So you have like, how do you look after camps? Where are things like education? Emergency telecoms, yeah, often in emergencies it's things like radio that is the best way for getting information out. So if someone can tell us where the radio masts are, and the fact that each radio mast covers an area of 50 miles, then we can begin to say, well, hold on, there's a section of the country here that hasn't got radio coverage. We need to go and do some messaging in that area. It could be around the food, nutrition, health, and logistics. So just a flavour of the type of the maps that we would create in the field. With the next set of maps, I would probably group them and say these are more to do with sort of hazards. These are things that either people responding to the emergency need to be aware of, or things that may be existing in the country or predicted to happen. So things like weather and weather forecasts, etc. So if we look there in the middle at the top, that's looking at sort of biologicals like Ebola. So where are areas that you shouldn't travel to, where are more high-risk areas of being affected. Cyclones and storms, again, where are they predicted to go? Where are they predicted to have any repercussions? Flood extents growing up and down, etc. I mean, in Nepal, something that was very important was landslides. So with an earthquake, lots of earth is destabilized. We then had monsoon rain, so it's then very heavy. So it was then a case of looking at slope analysis to say, well, where is there likely to be landslides? And let's make sure, if we can, that no one's going to be in the way of them when they happen. And obviously, when you look at things like the high land, if you're trying to say if there is to be another tsunami wave, then you can work out what's safe to do where. What you're obviously trying to think is if people are escaping one disaster, and they're coming together in an IDP camp or so forth. You don't want that to be somewhere that's got, say, low-lying land, because then they might get hit by a second wave. So an element of using your geographic information to make sure that no further disasters happen when you're there. And this last group of maps here, I would just group as other, frankly, because there's some things you just can't predict. Like I know when we respond to an earthquake, we're more than likely to do a map on search and rescue. I know if we respond to a tsunami or flooding, we're more than likely to do a map on the flood extents. Some things you just can't predict, and you will get requests in the field. The top right one here is where can I go and land a helicopter. The one that I like in the bottom left-hand corner is we know winter's coming, but what areas are affected first, because we need to get shelter to them first. That was looking 2 or 3 months into the future, but made a difference on where in the pool people targeted their resources first. So what I would say is if you ever want to see more of these particular types of maps, or see maps that have been created from real emergencies, etc., then always keep an eye on the MapAction website, and that has the maps and data catalogue in there. And that's obviously for people that are involved in the response, but also other people like news agencies, but also people that might be thinking about donating. Do they want to know about the picture of the type of information that's going on? They want to know what's going on in the ground to be able to say, well, actually, I'm going to send tents, or I'm going to send radio equipment, for example. So I'd always recommend people keep an eye on the website. And more of a practical resource, which anyone that's more interested in how do these maps come to be created, what kind of data do they consume, and where do we get it from, then I would suggest you look at something called guides.mapaction.org. That's effectively almost a map making wizard that takes you through the different products that I've just shown you. There's different groupings there, and sort of says, well, this map contained this information. Why did it contain it? Where did we get it from? Did we go on to update it, and so forth? So anyone that's more interested in the mechanics of how the maps are created, I suggest you have a look at guides.mapaction.org. So that's a little bit really about sort of generic MapAction, what we do and what we create in the field, etc. As I said, if we can do preparedness work in advance, going out and training people, that's effectively what we do in between emergencies. So what I just wanted to take a few minutes to do now is just give you an example of what it's like to be a volunteer in a particular disaster. So very quickly, with the Nepal earthquake, I happened to be in America, actually doing a training mission for MapAction with the American search and rescue teams. And then we all got a text message to say there had been a very shallow earthquake that was very powerful. Now, you've got to know a bit about earthquakes to understand that shallow and powerful means bad. So you saw some people going, oh my gosh, let's go. Other people saying, what's the drama? So you need some element of education to be able to say that a shallow and powerful earthquake in a city such as Kathmandu is going to be a big humanitarian disaster. So what effectively happened from being just below New York in America, with a number of hours I'd flown back to London, packed a very different bag with equipment, and was on my way to Kathmandu because I had been chosen as one of the volunteers to go. So you never really know what's going to happen. It can all change in a text message. I thought I was going to be back home and back at work after the weekend. I was then in the pool for 2.5 weeks. So what you can say is that when you land on the ground, you realize that, for example, the fire station had been badly damaged. So all their existing resources to help on search and rescue had been damaged in the earthquake itself. On the way there, we were with the search and rescue teams. The dogs, we got parked at, one of the other teams got parked at Delhi airport, and the dogs needed to get off the plane. But one of those silly things, if they'd gone anywhere near the airport building, the dogs sort of had to put in quarantine for 6 months. So there's some more practicalities about trying to get all you and your equipment to the field in time. And within a matter of days, you're being asked to produce, big overview maps of what's going on in the field. What can we tell the media? What can we tell the government? So within sort of 24, 36 hours, from one side of America to Nepal and creating common operational pictures there on the ground. Now, when you come to an example like Nepal, it was such a big disaster that one coordination center wasn't going to work. We ended up having 3 across Nepal. And just to make it more interesting, there was actually a follow-up earthquake. So after we were dealing with the first earthquake, there was a second earthquake, which damaged some further properties. And it's why we work in things like tents, because they are a lot more safe areas to be than in a already damaged building. You can see there from that map the size of the area affected by the earthquake in Nepal, and that effectively equated to an area about the size of Wales. So very quickly to wrap up on MapAction, why do I do it? I think the simple answer is it's an opportunity to use the GIS skills I use in my day job, but for a different and better cause. It's obviously very rewarding when you are able to help in these situations, but it's also around knowledge sharing and learning, in that I definitely learn new things through the MapAction training, and I also get to tell people. So when you have a group of 70, 80 people who work in all would probably say they work with GIS, but across so many different disciplines and market verticals, you do get to learn a lot about the industry as well. Very quickly, for people, there's a few questions that will come in which we'll cover at the end, but these next few slides are going to cover some of them on how you can get involved if you wanted to. The first thing I'd say around MapAction is that there's 2 real ways to be involved. There's the fundraising element of it, because obviously they are a charity, and there's actually getting more involved as a volunteer. Is that we often have places in the London Marathon, on the various Ride Londons and different cycle challenges, and also the picture there in the top right is the guys from ThinkWhere who went and did a sort of Tough Mudder or Ultimate Warrior challenge for charity. So many things you can do. If you're doing anything and you think, oh, it would be good to be sponsored to this, then obviously please do think of MapAction as a potential donor. What I would say about volunteering for MapAction is that there's sort of 3 main areas that they recruit volunteers for. There's the deployable side of things, actually going to the field, like the scenarios I've described. And there's also probably more sort of home-based volunteering, which is working on things like software development and technical support. When it comes to volunteering, they do recruit once a year, and they do that normally around January time. So keep an eye on things like websites. What I would say about volunteering for MapAction is you do need a fair amount of experience under your belt. So talking to sort of an ECN type audience, I'd say definitely keep an eye on MapAction, get in touch, express interest and so forth, but don't be surprised if they are looking for a bit of experience under the belt, because the type of stuff you're doing in the field is pretty intense and pretty specific. So don't be at all surprised if you don't get in first time. Many people don't. Always do keep on applying, or listen to their feedback. If they say, look, you probably need another 2-3 years experience, or if you had more experience with this, or if you could speak this language, etc. So always listen to their feedback, and don't be put off if you don't get in first time. And something I just wanted to highlight, we go back to that example of how much the map changed over 3 days. If you did want to be involved in that type of thing from your desk, from home, then there's an initiative called Missing Maps. That is something you can do on your own, but also there's get-togethers, and it's a great initiative that effectively looks to bring together mapping for parts of the world that don't have good coverage. And that's something you can get involved in as much or as little as you like. So that draws a line under MapAction. We will pick up the questions at the end on MapAction, but I'm just going to do 3 slides on the day job, because I'm just quickly going to point to a question there. Thank you to Steve to say there's a Missing Maps event tonight, and one in Cambridge next Thursday. So do go get involved in those if you want to. So MapAction is a volunteer role. Most of us have day jobs, and a lot of effort obviously goes into those 2 weeks deployment, but we all have to do something to fill the rest of the week. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm now based in Dubai. Just to give you a quick little insight on what it's like to be sort of international geospatial GIS consultant. So what do I do? On an average day I'll come on to, but the type of things that I work in could be explaining to governments the benefit of GI. Now, one thing I would say is that no one in government knows what GIS is, so you have to talk in their language. So I have to go in and brief people maybe on information management or smart cities. Sometimes they might know what geospatial is on GIS, so you go from there. But when you're dealing with the higher levels of government, it's a lot more about talking in their language. Same if you ever try to explain what GIS is to your friends or to your boss, you often end up having to find some different language to describe it. So obviously I'm an advocate for the better use of location intelligence, and that's the broad use of GIS and its application. Again, a lot of these things are buzzwords. You might have used the word digital transformation a few months ago, smart cities and so forth. It's about, again, explaining to people how GIS fits in with these things. And sort of two of the terms that I probably end up working in a lot are helping organizations understand where they are with GIS, and that's something we would call geomaturity, and helping them make a plan to move forward from there. So geospatial strategies or geospatial roadmap. The type of things that, the topics, areas, etc., that I would say I work in. If I was to describe an average week quickly, I would say my diary next week has me traveling to a country in the Middle East to speak with their Ministry of Land and talk about how they were going to design a postcode system for their country. Later this week, I'm speaking at a think tank event on smart cities, trying to get other people who are working in smart cities to think about how location and location data fits in with what they're doing. I know I have a big pile of work to do on my desk, which is all about submitting proposals. One of them is for a digital mapping project in Africa. More on the commercial side of the world, I have just this morning got back from visiting a big airline company, as it happens, trying to explain to them, what are their recent projects that have used geospatial data and effectively what money have they saved from doing that. And something I'd recommend everyone does is always dedicate some time to reading the latest industry news, blogs, etc. Because being a consultant, especially, you need to keep up to date on a number of different, disciplines. So I know a little about many things in regards to Earth observations, drones. Something in Dubai that keep talking about is flying taxis, economics, and where's the money coming from for geospatial and so forth. So in short, there's a good variety of work in an average week. Again, just for your benefit there, why do I do it and what do I enjoy about it? The variety of work. As a consultant, obviously you're not restricted to one particular type of work. You can choose the type of work that you do, so the variety is very exciting. The travel has its pros and cons. I've been to lots of places in the world, but unfortunately, most of them I've been to, I've seen the airport, a taxi, a hotel, an office block, back in the taxi and back in the airport. So yes, you do get to travel where I can. I obviously go and try and enjoy the countries that I'm traveling to. And again, these two are similar to MapAction. There's a lot of things you can do with knowledge sharing with your consultant, but there's also a lot of things you learn as you do it as well. So that brings to a close an insight into both MapAction and life as a geospatial consultant in the international arena. I hope that's been useful for you. If Holly's happy, I will just start taking some of the questions which are in. If you bear with me, I'm just going to scroll up. So Tim's asking here, who decides where MapAction operate? That decision is made by that small office team that I mentioned. Obviously, as I said, it's an interesting scenario where we don't want to be deployed because that means something's gone wrong in the world. If we accept that that's a reality, then there's an element of safety and security. So we're not going to be deployed to a war zone. That's not what we do. We may go and try and help from a neighboring country. For example, in the Syria crisis, we were deployed to Turkey to try and help from the other side of the border. So it's a decision based on a number of factors. Obviously, things like the government of the country has to have requested you to come, or they have to request the United Nations, who then invite us. It might be if there were 2 to choose from, we will deploy to different things at once. Obviously, the main thing is, will our services on the ground help? And that's obviously the main driver for going or no going. There's one here about the food crisis in Africa. Actions in the field, probably one I'll follow up in more detail for you there. But I guess the rough type of thing that's going on in Africa will be more looking at logistics mapping, access to food, market analysis in regards to what are the markets doing, are there trends in markets, as in physical markets on the ground, are there stocks up or down, and you do that by going out and doing in-field assessments. So either us directly or us working with our partners would maybe design a questionnaire that you go and ask market stall holders around the amount of stock that they've got, or crops, etc. So I'll come back a bit more on the Africa mapping. What I would say is have a look at the MapAction website, and that will have all the maps that have been created for the different African disasters that we've responded to. The question here about OSM and open source. Again, all our work and products are made open. The only time we don't make them open is if there's any particular security reasons that we can't, or if there's any commercial reasons. So some companies make their data available for the humanitarian sector to work with. Some people, like satellite mapping companies and so forth, will make their data available, but not for full release. So we might have to release something in PDF, but we can't release the raw data. Again, I'll pick up the more specific questions on Senegal and Mali. So Paul's question now, I think I covered earlier, but recruitment's normally around January. Normally volunteers, we bring in between 5 and 10 in the recruitment cycle. It obviously varies on the type of people applying, and if there's 20 excellent people, then obviously it's not a fixed number. On the type of software being used, the maps you've seen there were probably mostly created in ArcGIS. We don't commonly use a graphic design program to top them up. That probably comes down to individual volunteer experience, but most of those are just created in ArcGIS desktop. When we do training, it's definitely more on QGIS, because obviously you can leave that behind for people to work on. So I would, for Miriam's question on qualifications, I would point you to the MapAction website, where it effectively has a job description for the volunteer roles. I said as much as qualifications, I'd say it's around experience, as I mentioned. Another one there on OSM and JOSM. In desktop, I will point again to an online resource for that, but yes, OpenStreetMap OSM there is a great resource for the field, because it's something that's obviously open and it's easily accessible. One thing we obviously do have to be aware of is, again, if we don't have great internet connectivity in the field, then we effectively will download a copy of OSM, take it with us on a hard drive, and use it in whatever we can to if we can get updates over satellite communications, etc. But I can tell you from trying that you can't download a 2 GB satellite image over a satellite phone without getting charged about $10,000 for the phone bill. So it's about taking the key information into the field. There's a question here about free data. Yeah, if you have a look at the MapAction website, all the, if possible, if there's data to be downloaded. That's why it's now been termed the Map and Data Catalog, because obviously if we capture data in the field, if you follow the links through the MapAction website, you'll also see things like Humanitarian Data Exchange, or HDX. That's a website that's all about data sharing. It's kind of like data.gov.uk for those familiar with the UK government's sharing platform. Yep, there's a question there on HDX again. Yeah, we do. If we post something in the MapAction website, it automatically gets posted across a number of other humanitarian websites. Humanitarian Info, Relief Web is another one. Great question there. Someone obviously knows about Kathmandu and Kathmandu Living Labs. Yes, to briefly explain to others, Kathmandu Living Labs was an organization that was already based in Kathmandu, and were still active after the earthquake. They did have some problems with their infrastructure, and they had data losses, etc. But we coordinated with them, and there was something called QuakeMap that was born out of that, on a technology called Ushahidi, which some people might have come across, and that was a great tool for collecting people sort of public reporting. So rather than maybe how we would report fly tips and so forth in the UK, this was reporting issues, need for resources or issues with roads, etc., in a central place that then could be coordinated with the, in this case, the Nepalese army, who then went out to try and save the, fix the problem. So a question from Miriam there on ArcGIS Collector, or sorry, Arc Collector as in the app. Yes, I think broadly speaking, we use technology-based data collection in the field. Obviously, that could range from just a GPS collecting a point or a track. More form-based, I have seen Collector used. There is something called Kobo, K-O-B-O. If you Google that, you'll see it's a kind of a humanitarian version of Arc Collector that's designed almost as a survey, a form, but it can be linked back to sort of location data underneath. And basically what that is a tablet-based system that syncs to a Google spreadsheet, which we effectively would download and then map the data from that. So yes, I have seen Arc Collector used, but also there's a number of other technologies out there as well. Thank you to Steve and Paul, who just mentioned there about the Missing Maps events in UCL tonight and Cambridge next week. I have one question that was submitted by email, which I'll quickly cover off, and then I'll pass back over Holly. So this is from Dave, and he said, this is more around the international working. He's asking, many fellow geospatial colleagues are keen to work abroad from the experience and the adventure. Is it best to go through a recruitment agency and fix your sights on a country, or choose a company and see where they have opportunities? Really great question. I think it comes down to your personal appetite, and I'd probably say your personal risk appetite as well. So I was quite bold in learning about the markets for geospatial in Dubai and the Middle East, and then deciding to move here and invest and open my own company. That wasn't a small decision and took a lot of planning. I do now work alongside people who are posted here in Dubai, and they work for some of the big companies. Might be the Googles, the Esris, Atkins, Arup, KPMG, Deloitte, and all the ones. So I think probably it's a case of, if you work for a big organization, you're not going to be the only one that's got their hand up for a nice, juicy one-year placement in Dubai or wherever the next place. But it's probably an easier route in the sense of they will look after the process of moving you here, putting you up in hotels or accommodation. So if you're working for a big organization, they will look after a lot of the detail for you, but you'll be part of a bigger group of people probably wanting to do it. You can sign up. There are some international agencies and recruiters. What I would just sort of say about that is, just obviously with any kind of recruitment agency, manage your expectations. They're all possibly fighting for the same job, and they'll always make it sound great, but do your homework and make sure the situation is as rosy on the ground as it said so. So with that question from Dave, and for all the others, I thank you very much, and I'll hand back over to Holly.
Thanks, Matt. We've had a couple of questions on Twitter, if you don't mind answering those. That's all right.
Sure.
Had one very similar to the one you just answered, so we'll leave that one. Hope that answered your question. You mentioned drones were becoming more used in a place where you're deployed. Someone's asked, is it worth becoming an accredited drone pilot, in your opinion? I don't know if you know much about that.
Sure, great question. I mean, I think accredited drone pilot, the problem there is who's recognising the accreditation, because an accredited drone pilot in the UK might not be an accredited drone pilot in Africa or Australia or the next place. I'd say there is definitely, it's a rapidly changing environment. There is a link that I'll tweet and tag with the ECN tag to a sort of United Nations body that are looking at drones and drones in humanitarian. I don't think it's going to go away. Whether I'd go as far as becoming an accredited pilot just for humanitarian work, possibly not. Do I think it's probably worth it for the UK and other markets? Then I'd say, yeah, if you've got the time, then it's a great thing to have on your CV.
Okay, thanks. Same person. Which markets in the UK do you see an increased need for geospatial consulting?
Okay, so I'm a bit out of touch with the UK, but as I've not been based there for 18 months, but I do come back and forth. So take this with a slight pinch of salt, but I would suggest still government is being more active in geospatial data, but by no means has maximised all the benefits of it. So I still think you'll see public sector as a big use of consultancy. But I think the growth in other technologies like or terms such as big data, predictive analytics, smart cities and so forth, that's going to drive a need for understanding in the commercial sector as well. So if we're looking at verticals, I'd definitely say things like Earth observation on a massive increase, a kind of bit of a rebirth of Earth observation as a kind of technology, and the amount we can do with data is caught up. I'd definitely say that's a big area. Public sector, and also definitely keep an eye on things on these other technologies like predictive analytics in the commercial world, and I guess probably all under the banner of business intelligence.
Brilliant, thank you. Questions on Twitter, and that's perfectly on time. So thanks everyone for watching. This is being recorded, so will be available and so you can watch it again or send it to your peers who might be interested in it. Thanks again, Matt, for joining us today and giving up your time and from Dubai.
No problem, thank you.
And please follow us on Twitter, AGI_ECN, to find out what's happening next with it. Thanks very much. Bye.